Always my soulmate. By Watermelon's Melon Felon. Chapter 28. Hue, color my world. Katsuki Yuri did not remember the day he met his soulmate. All he knew was that at some point he'd gotten 2 large handprints on his back. Both prints were swirls of silvery blue and spanned from his sides and around his back. He didn't know where they came from and didn't even know when he'd gotten them. Just that they existed. It was Peachy who had informed him after seeing him take his shirt off. So Yuri was now aware of the fact that he'd met his soulmate sometime between December 5th and December 15th, and he wanted to smack his head off of something. The marks had not been there before going to the Grand Prix final, so they appeared after getting to Russia. That could mean that his soulmate could be a Russian person he'd met somehow, a fellow figure skater, which was a problem, seeing as so many had traveled to Russia at the time from all over the world. Someone he met on a plane. They could even be someone from Yuri's university. And the stress it placed on his shoulders was intense. How did his soulmate get close enough to hold him in such a place? Yuri did not engage in sexual anything with anyone. Ever. And his pole fitness classes had ended last year, so no one could touch his unclothed body in any fashion. Not even Peachy had an answer, though he did try to get Yuri to agree to a photo shoot just to expose the marks, because for some reason he thought that would actually help Yuri find a soulmate again. He'd refused because he didn't feel comfortable bearing any part of his body at present, which left them in perpetual confusion. Victor Nikiforov found himself staring almost longingly down at his arms. From his wrists to his forearms where black and maroon marks resided. And they'd appeared because his soulmate had touched him there first. Katsuki Yuri had latched onto Victor's wrists and insistently tugged him out to the dance floor. His hands had trailed up the Russian skater's arms and had remained in place for several seconds because he'd almost fallen, and Victor had reached out to catch him before he slammed into the floor, which left the two of them to stare at one another for several seconds of shock. Within a few minutes, he took note of the swirl-patterned marks on his arms, and the odd marks that appeared where he'd been holding Yuri. Yuri's shirt had been returned to his body, but wasn't buttoned, so it swished back and forth as he twirled them around. And Victor found himself wishing that his soul mark had appeared on his face first, where his partner had caressed him while dipping him so smoothly, and then he'd have Yuri's colors in a place where everyone could see them. It was a shame his mark on Yuri wasn't easy to find either, but at least the mark existed. Victor had a soulmate! And now, after a few months of hearing nothing about Yuri, he'd finally been given some sort of sign, with Yuri speaking a language they both knew all too well. He'd been called to Japan. Yuri had asked him to come and be his coach, and the video of him skating to Victor's routine was the proof that he remembered their evening together. Yuri gaped openly at the dark colors swirled onto Victor's arms. Many people, when faced with an attractive man who was naked, wouldn't be staring at his arms. But Yuri's eyes just immediately honed in on the colors that he couldn't help himself. He'd never seen anything like Victor's marks before. Sure, he'd seen people with a streak of swirls across their faces from being smacked by their soulmates upon first meeting, but Victor's marks were very long and took up a considerable amount of space. And the marks only added to Victor's beauty. If Yuri could be so bold. Victor said something about being Yuri's coach. Victor wanted to coach Yuri for the next season that Yuri had only just decided he would compete in. Great? No one could say that Victor did not take advantage of the situation's life through his way. After all, now that Yurio had gone back to Russia, it meant that Victor and Yuri could have more private time together. And that also meant Victor could slide closer during their times on the ice or in the onsen. So much closer that he managed to nearly pull Yuri directly out of the water so he could test Yuri's flexibility, which was as good as he remembered, and if his eyes greedily drank in the sight of the silvery blue swirling handprints on Yuri's back, that was no one's business but his own. But just to be sure that Yuri didn't catch on to what he was doing, he proceeded to lift the younger man's leg all the way up, enjoying how far he could bend the other's body. Meanwhile, Yuri gasped and grunted about never choosing his own music before and not knowing what to choose for his free program. "I'm sure you'll get it," Victor encouraged, trailing a finger down Yuri's calf and watching in amazement as a small trail of color followed the path of his skin. But then it disappeared. He frowned. Why would the color disappear? In fact, why did it appear again? It bore some looking into. The next time Victor ended up leaving colors on Yuri's body was when he threw himself onto the ice in order to smother him with kisses. When he'd finally distanced himself enough, he noticed the silver and blue swirls all over his Yuri's lips and watched as the colors faded slowly. Much more slowly compared to the last time. Maybe the pressure used affected how long the color lasted? Yuri, of course, gaped up at him, but not at his eyes. He was staring at Victor's mouth. And while lying there on the ice, Yuri reached up to trail his finger over Victor's mouth. "You're my soulmate," he whispered in awe, and Victor had to wonder how this was new information to him. Was that why Yuri kept running away? "I don't remember any of that!" Yuri felt so bad. Victor had just told him about the night of the Sochi GPF banquet, and he was in parts mortified and happy because it proved that Victor hadn't just randomly decided to come to Japan. He'd come because Yuri had asked him to be his coach, and it also made everything he did from the time of his arrival until now more intimate. The touching and smiling and the clinging, the sweet way he'd called Yuri's name and told him he was amazing. "I am so sorry," he blustered, feeling horrible. Victor said, "You entranced me that night, and I wanted nothing else but to be with you again. And I am with you, so it worked out in the end," he said with a small shrug, drawing random designs on Yuri's hand and smiling when the swirls of color followed his finger. "At least you could show me the photos and videos you took." A devilish smile spread across Victor's face then. "Yuri was the one to send me 90% of the content I saved from that night," he gasped. "Yuri did?" "Mm-hmm," was Victor's excited reply. "What does that tell you?" Many things. Your first touch will always remain. That's the way of soulmates. Anything beyond that comes and goes," said Yuri's mother as she folded towels. "I was waiting for you to realize it. Poor Vic-chan was waiting for so long, too." Yuri buried his face in Victor's shirt, face redder than any red. He didn't mean to forget. But at least he knew where the marks came from. From Victor. And their positioning was explained in a photo from Chris, where Victor had held him so sweetly while Yuri stared up at him completely awestruck. Victor had fallen in love with him in that evening. Everyone had known they were soulmates, but hadn't brought it up. He shivered when he felt Victor trailing a hand down his spine. "I can't wait to experiment," Victor purred low enough for Yuri's mother to not hear him. Yuri couldn't wait either. Now, if only Victor would stop leaving him hickeys that take forever to fade away, because unlike normal hickeys that turned purple and bruised, Yuri's consisted of silvery blue swirls all over his poor neck. His mind couldn't stop bringing up the speculation that arose at the Grand Prix final, and the comments about how his silver medal matched his marks so nicely.